From the Delhi studios of Republic TV, it's time for Arnab Goswami on the debate.
Arnab Goswami on the debate at 10, powered by Reva University, Quick Heal Secrite, Green Lamb Laminates, PolicyBazaar.com, co-powered by Mankind Pharma.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. A rather strange theory has been floated by the country that launched apparently a global war against terrorism. A country that took out Osama bin Laden on Pakistani soil, rightly so, without Islamabad's support in their apparent commitment to the war against terror. An apparent country that sees it as their moral right to go into country after country after country after country after country. Every second country in the world they enter, saying it is their moral obligation to enter these countries to fight terrorism. From Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya, everywhere. But now, ladies and gentlemen, that same country, the White House has said that an Indian national is involved in a plot to kill Khalistani terrorist Pannun, and the United States is so keen to protect this terrorist that they foiled the plot, they say. But even in their press release is written with disclaimers saying these are merely accusations. Nothing is verified. Even their own press release cannot concretely explain who is this Indian Nick Gupta. And how is he an Indian asset, as they seem to suggest. If you go through their own press release, even their own press release cannot explain how Indian intel agencies are part of this grand plot. It is only suggestive insinuations. I will poke holes in their American argument later. But the question is that isn't it strange that Washington is going out on a limb for a terrorist? Washington is going absolutely crazy protecting a terrorist. Washington is going out of its way to defend a terrorist. It's like, ladies and gentlemen, imagine this, and this is as clear as it can get. Imagine al-Zawahiri or Osama bin Laden going around and shopping in Manhattan. And imagine if the British government were to develop a spine and go into America and eliminate Osama bin Laden, who was shopping in Manhattan. And imagine then, after that, if the Americans would say, how dare you kill Osama bin Laden? He has a right to live. So what if he's hijacking, killing, flying planes into buildings, but he has a right to exist? The man has human rights. Viewers, Washington is today openly batting for the rights of a terrorist who's operating on their soil. And what kind of terrorist is this? A terrorist who does not even seek deniability. A terrorist who from American soil says, I'm going to carry out hijackings, I'm going to kill people, I'm going to plot, I'm part of a plot and a conspiracy to kill Indian politicians, Indian religious figures. I just don't understand what the Americans are doing here. A classic American bargain against the growing independent prowess of India. Ladies and gentlemen, my view is absolutely clear. One, we must investigate whether this Pannun terrorist is a CIA asset. You can't rule out the possibility that Pannun, who has got shelter in the US and in Canada, is part of a larger CIA game to muscle flex because of their insecurity against the growing influence of India in the world. There are too many blank spots in this narrative, ladies and gentlemen. And my overall perspective is this. Let us be clear, there is no bromance and there never will be any romance diplomatically, militarily or strategically between India and the United States of America. We have to work with the US, but we must understand the Americans have never been on anyone's side. The Americans today with India, the Indian economy being close to 4 trillion, are intrigued by India. They want to do business with India. The moment we grow beyond 8 to 10 trillion, they will compete with India. And the moment we grow to 12 to 15 trillion, which won't take very long at the rate which we are growing, it will be all-out battle with the Americans, because their influence will recede and we as the third largest economy will eat into their space. The Americans like to bargain. And the message Biden is sending out is this: we are going to dangle this as a Damocles sword over you unless you give us entry into your markets. This is as clear as it can get. I think we should stare the Americans back and tell them to take a walk. We must tell them that A, we are not responsible, B, we are not answerable, and C, that the same person they are nurturing on their soil is also a person who should be convicted and extradited back to India under international laws. The time has come to look them back in the eye and give them a piece of our mind. Let's debate.
Gurpatwant Pannun, a declared terrorist who spews venom against India from the US soil, calls for secession and openly issues threats of terror attacks on India. And the US seems to be going out on a limb to defend a terrorist.
So far as India is concerned, Pannun is a designated terrorist of a terrorist organization. He has publicly professed of dismembering India, of wanting to carry out terror acts. Why would the United States then go out on a limb and compromise its friendship with India and be seen with Pannun? That's a question we have to ask.
Federal prosecutors have charged a certain Nikhil Gupta for murder for hire charges and claimed that an alleged Indian government employee was involved in a plot to murder Pannun.
Some inputs pertaining to nexus between organized criminals, gun runners, terrorists, other extremists. We take, of course, such inputs very seriously, and a high-level inquiry committee has been constituted to look into all the relevant aspects of the matter. We cannot share any further information on such security matters. As regards the case against an individual that has been filed in a US court, allegedly linking him to an Indian official, this is a matter of concern. We have said, and let me reiterate, that this is also contrary to government policy.
But what is alarming is US risking its ties with India and going out of its way to defend a terrorist. Because it's the same country that launched covert operation in Pakistan to eliminate dreaded terrorist Osama bin Laden. Is there more than what meets the eye as far as US interests are concerned when it comes to Gurpatwant Pannun? Let's debate.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Joseph Chalil. He is author and publisher of the Universal News Network and former chairman of the Indo-American Press Club. Stephen Golub is joining us from California. He's an international affairs expert. Sukhi Chehel is founder, CEO and editor-in-chief of the Khalsa Today. Major Gaurav Arya is our strategic affairs editor. We have Dr. Brahma Chelani, author and professor, strategic studies at the Center for Policy Research. And I'd like to begin with a veteran diplomat, Ambassador G. Parthasarthi. Mr. Parthasarthi, now the Americans are suggesting, and I'd like to underline the word suggesting, they are suggesting that India was involved in a plot to eliminate Pannun. Can you hear me, Dr. Parthasarthi? Mr. Parthasarthi, can you hear me, sir?
You are not clear to me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Ambassador, can you hear me? Can I?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Mr. Parthasarthi? Yeah, fantastic.
Yes,
the Americans are suggesting.
Yeah.
The Americans are suggesting, Mr. Parthasarthi, that the Indians have been involved in a plot to eliminate Pannun on American soil. Now, why are they making this suggestion? What is their intention in your view?
You see, I think their main view is to protect their cabinet colleague and great friend, the Prime Minister of Canada, who has had a continuous links with the Sikh terrorists operating from their country. And I want to make the point that these people operate also through visits to Pakistan and close links with the Pakistanis, both in Canada and when they visit Pakistan. The Sikh population here, by and large, is law-abiding, but you do have two leaders which they had. One was Hardeep Singh Najjar, who was killed a couple of months ago, and Pannun. Pannun is the existing leader of the Khalistani movement in Canada. The Americans know this. It's not as if they don't know this, but they're willing to overlook the transgressions by Trudeau and try to put the blame on us for whatever is happening. The real evil in this cause is the active assistance provided by the Trudeau family, not just the present Trudeau, but his father, to Khalistanis and extremists from Punjab living in Canada. And unless the Americans can say anything, our boys remain in contact with a lot of people, but it's ridiculous to allege that we would go around trying to bump off people. There was no accusation when Pannun, when Najjar was killed. They're still investigating. The whole question is raised by Pannun. And Pannun has the convenient facility of having a dual Canadian and American citizenship. Now, the US, I am pretty well assured, have no interest in promoting instability and violence in Punjab province in India, nor does the US have an interest in working with the ISI and the terrorist group operating from Canada. The villains of this are Prime Minister Trudeau. His father was equally guilty of encouraging extremism. And let's not forget the Air India crash which took place in the 80s. His father was very much an apologist for it. So as far as I'm concerned, we'll have to work this out with the Americans. Sure, I don't know what sort of contacts they have had, but certainly the Americans are guilty of protecting a supporter of terrorism, Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, okay. So your support, you're saying this is part of an overall support to Trudeau. But
yes,
what I'm amazed by, Dr. Joseph Khalil, is the fact that the Americans are so actively supporting a terrorist. And there is no doubt that he is a terrorist because he's been going around saying that I'm going to bomb planes. Air India planes should not take off. They will be hijacked. They will be bombed. Indian religious figures will be killed. Indian serving politicians will be assassinated. Does this not matter to the Americans? Or are the Americans impervious to this?
Arnab, this is a very unfortunate incident, how half-cooked credible allegation, again, similar to what the Canadian story looked like, talking about, someone, Mr. Gupta, seemed to have contacts with somebody in a police force in India with no credible proof. So it's first of all for the American, the Manhattan District Attorney to prove it. The timing also looks very odd, even though this news was out 6 months ago. Why is it coming in now? And even the news brief, press releases given to all the major, especially New York Times, has no mention of Mr. Pannun being an activist or a terrorist, or he threatening Air India flights, or killing Indian diplomats worldwide, including Indian prime ministers. So what if this was a crazy guy who was an active supporter of, let's say, a fan of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and wants to take a revenge against her murder, and wanted to, pay $15,000 for it. And how do they prove it's the state involvement? So it doesn't make sense. It seems so unprofessional that it is done by an amateur, with a hit for hire. It doesn't. It's not easy to believe it. So I am not sure where they're going with it. I'm pretty sure this might be done by some elements of the administration without the full support of the Biden administration here. Again, otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Then it also doesn't make sense why Pannun, who's been threatening lives, airplane bombings, is walking freely unless he has some relationship with as an informant to one of the federal agencies here. So it raises a lot of questions. I don't think we should be worrying much about this.
No, but I am, exactly the point you made. Abhishek was talking about it earlier today. Abhishek joins me now. Abhishek, the point of concern here is the level of institutional support for Pannun. I think that was suggested by Dr. Joseph Chalil that Pannun could be a strategic asset for the Americans. In that case, what is the point of such a close Indo-American relationship if they are going to be using such assets against India? Then the relationship becomes very hostile, doesn't it? Do you suspect he's a CIA asset? Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So we were there in the United States covering Prime Minister Modi's visit in 2021.
Yes.
September.
Yes.
25th of September to be precise.
Yeah.
Prime Minister was in Washington DC, and there were protests happening outside the White House from where we were covering.
Right.
You see a bunch of Khalistanis, 50 odd those Khalistanis, they come in, start shouting anti-India slogans. Now we are covering those protests, and there is a diaspora present.
Yeah.
And they disturb the festive atmosphere.
Okay.
And they bring in rancor.
Okay.
And they have a Secret Service cover. And suddenly I spot Ghulam Nabi Fai. You remember that? We did
I remember
story.
that. Great story.
Now Ghulam Nabi Fai is an ISI asset.
No doubt about it.
Now the interesting thing is, Arnab, bear with me. It's very interesting. The Americans should listen to it, so they would understand how we see things. There is another protest happening of the Uyghur Muslims next to the same place. Now, because it's a summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, and I will do the Quad summit also, so there were the Australian and Japanese Prime Ministers. Then there was no point of having a Uyghur protest there, but it was happening. Now, we covered that, but then suddenly I saw that this Uyghur guy is talking to a Hindi channel, Hindi news channel that was covering the event there. I got curious that how is this Uyghur guy speaking to a Hindi channel?
Yeah.
So I went there and he was actually speaking in Hindi Urdu. So once that interview was over, I spoke to him. I said, "How are you speaking in Hindi or Urdu?" He said, "I have lived in Islamabad for 10 years. And then I thought you connect. There is Ghulam Nabi Fai, an ISI asset. There is an Uyghur Muslim who has lived in Islamabad, who has a Pakistani wife and a kid.
Fascinating.
And in Washington, D.C., those protests are going on.
Yeah.
So the CIA winks and says, okay, fine, ISI, hold the protest you want, but hold one more protest to embarrass the Chinese.
Yeah.
So obviously, there are layers within layers, and that's how it happens perhaps. But then, in the case of...
So these are guns for hire. What you're saying is, your experience shows that there are many people who are guns for hire for America.
Yes.
And this terrorist is one of them.
Yes, but unfortunately, for the United States, to be talking at the level of National Security Advisor, to be talking at the level of Secretary of State, to be talking at the level of the President, for Pannun clearly shows that there is a larger matrix which the CIA does not want disturbed. And that's why they are taking it to this level where they are willing to put at stake, if not the entire India-US relationship, some part of it, to be protecting Pannun to this level.
I'm appalled actually at what Americans are doing here, and I'd like Brahma Chelani on this. I just will come in with very small interventions on this, Dr. Chelani. America has seen what happens when planes are hijacked. Americans have been killed in the biggest mass murder in the history of the world, which was on 9/11. I think there must be, informed people in America must now start talking about how a terrorist who is saying that Air India flights will be hijacked and bombed, and who has said in a video, he has said, I'm going to bomb and who has said that all Air India flights will be destroyed on Indira Gandhi's birthday. He's saying that Sikhs should not board Air India flights on November 18th, and who has said, I repeat, he has said because on that day there will be a global genocide, a global blockade, and Air India will not be allowed to fly. Because if anybody gets on an Air India plane, it will be life-threatening, and I'm putting out this warning to the government of India. It is so shocking. And if there are any Americans watching this, American broadcasters, they must know and they must debate this. That your country is supporting a man who's threatening to bomb, destroy and hijack planes. And that's not a prank. It's a serious matter. But such support for this man must be a moment of an ethical debate in America as to what Americans are doing. Dr. Chelani, I think we need to push that argument a little forward, a little more aggressively than we have done so far.
I agree with you, Arnab. Just look at the US Department of Justice statement on this case. It refers to Pannun as the victim, as a vocal critic of the Indian government and a leader of a US-based organization that advocates for the secession of Punjab. That's how Pannun is described. There is no reference to the fact that this guy from US soil has been making terrorist threats against India, against Air India, against the New Delhi airport, against Canadians of Hindu origin, of Hindu faith. There is something very disturbing about this case.
Sinister.
But more fundamentally, what we are seeing is an unholy nexus between some Anglosphere security or intelligence agencies and prominent Khalistanis. Pannun is only one of them. For example, after this Canadian Niger was killed in June, the FBI, according to American media, individually warned prominent Khalistanis living in California that they should upgrade their security. So, we have a case where, where there is a nexus between Khalistanis and some intelligence agencies, and even this Canadian Niger who was killed had a nexus with Canada's main intelligence agency, which is known by its abbreviation CSIS. According to Canadian media, in the months leading to Niger's killing, intelligence officers of CSIS were regularly meeting with Niger. So this kind of linkage between prominent Khalistanis and intelligence or security agencies in the Anglosphere is what India ought to be highlighting. For example, why is Indian government not speaking up on the US tolerating Pannun making terrorist threats from US soil repeatedly? In fact, what this case underlines is that it was the US that helped instigate Trudeau by sharing some inputs that led Trudeau to make his allegation against India from the floor of the Canadian Parliament. In fact, this indictment that has been released yesterday actually refers to the Niger case. So there is a clear link between the US and what Trudeau went on to allege against India. And I think the whole story also raises raises an important issue about the Indian government's response. The Indian government very quietly set up what it called a high-power committee, inquiry committee, to investigate American allegation. But why is the Indian government quiet?
No, we should.
On the fact that the US is allowing some prominent Khalistanis, including Pannun, to make terrorist threats against Indian targets. In fact,
I am personally very disappointed, I must say. I'm very disappointed, Mr. Chelani. I like the outspoken nature of Mr. Jaishankar's response to issues. On this, I am disappointed that the eloquent Mr. Jaishankar has not given it back to the Americans. And I think, you know, if he were to do so, he would, not for a round of applause here, but to remind the Americans what they are doing. Stephen, I'd like to come to you next. Would you agree with me if I were to say that America has become like Pakistan? How Pakistan used to harbor assets like Osama. America harbors assets like Pannun. Now let me tell you the similarity between Osama and Pannun. Osama used to put out videos saying, I will hijack planes, I will kill people. Pannun does that. Osama has been part of bombings and assassinations. Pannun has been part of bombings and assassinations. Pannun has put out a video recently, Stephen, and from American soil, where he's celebrating the assassinations of Indian Prime Minister. He has issued warnings to people who are Hindus who are residing in Canada. He has said that like the Hamas attacked Israel, we will attack India. This man is there on your soil, Stephen. He's sitting on your soil. And he's not an innocent man. He is not an activist, Stephen. He's not an activist. He has threatened the Indian Prime Minister and has warned of bloodshed across India. These are not empty warnings. The Khalistanis are known terrorist groups. And I think there is a moment of reflection here. We were very curious to know what the Americans are going out on a limb for this man. Do the FBI not know who he is? Does the CIA not know who Pannun is? Is it possible they don't know who he is? Of course they do. Stephen, what's your take?
My take is, I have a few takes. First of all, it's still early in this unfolding story. More may come out about this indictment and investigation. In terms of whether or not this fellow is a terrorist, frankly, your coverage is just very different from what we're getting in the United States from our major and I'd say, mainstream responsible news outlets, which do not make these kinds of accusations. I also take seriously that your own government, the Indian government, is taking seriously the possibility that this was an assassination attempt and that it was not justified by virtue of the statements it's made. When I listen to the statements that have been made here today, with all due respect to the foreign policy and political expertise of the other guests, I hear a combination of not just the current Canadian government, but the Trudeau family, multi-generational, the CIA, the FBI, in effect, our own broadcasters and major news outlets and international news outlets such as Reuters and the New York Times and the like, not indicating that this fellow is a rabid terrorist, that you have this whole combination of two governments, many news outlets, many institutions, and the Indian government itself saying, let's take a careful look at this and not jump to conclusions about whether this fellow is a terrorist, and look carefully into the possibility that this was an assassination attempt that by no means should be allowed, that should be investigated and indictment should flow. So that's my basic take, that we're just getting very different information here. And with all due respect to your reporting, I hope the Indian government issues a white paper demonstrating that this fellow is a terrorist before we jump to conclusions about whether or not he is. Now, there's another issue here I just want to emphasize, is that even if you're correct
Stephen,
about this in your allegations,
if I may, Stephen, one point here.
I'll just finish this.
One point, one response to you, please.
It's a very important.
One response to you.
Okay, please go on.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, I think you're wrong. The Indian government has said that this is not Indian government policy. I don't know how you can take that as an affirmation in any sense. That's point number one.
That's not what I said.
The point number two is,
that's not what I said.
how can you
Let's
go
be
by
clear,
these?
that's not
How
what I
can
said,
no no?
okay?
You
I
are
just want
saying
to emphasize
you are saying that a couple of no, no allow me to complete. Allow me to complete. You're saying that Reuters and New York Times, for example, have not mentioned the terrorist activities of Pannun. If Reuters and New York Times tomorrow were to also underplay the terror antecedents of Osama bin Laden or al-Zawahiri, would you say that al-Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden are not terrorists? Please be practical about it. This man has said that Indira Gandhi was answered with weapons. He has celebrated assassinations. He said the World Cup of cricket will be known as the World Terror Cup. He has threatened the life of the Prime Minister of India. He has claimed responsibility. No. Just because you're allow me to complete. Allow me to complete. I have a straight question for you, Stephen. Stephen, I have one question to you. If tomorrow an Indian national or an American national on Indian soil or American soil were to say that on so and so date all American planes will be hijacked and bombed and destroyed, I want to know what the FBI would do. How would they react to that?
So could you answer my question? When did he make these alleged statements?
How would they react to that?
When did
All
he
right,
make
I'll
these
tell you.
alleged
Thank you for asking this question. Exactly. Thank you for the opportunity here, Stephen. Thank you for the opportunity to reply to you out there. See, Stephen.
Sure.
These allegations have been made. The latest videos that have been uploaded by Pannun are as recently as 11th October 2023. The threat to Air India, 4th November 2023. This is happening from your soil. I am not making this up, believe me. The fact that you don't know about it just shows to me, Gaurav, just proves to me, Gaurav, that how much the American media is trying to cover up for this man. The fact that the Americans don't know about what this man is. If this was to be published, front page in the New York Times, Gaurav, then I would have liked to see American government reactions to things like this. I don't know why they're not reporting it. Gaurav, would you like to reply to Stephen out there? Because Stephen is not aware of what this man is and what he does.
Well, actually, could I just finish my second point, though? Because you cut me off there, and I'll just be brief about it.
Okay, fine. Let you finish your second point, and then I'll bring in Gaurav. Sure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your perspective on this. If in fact, even if there is evidence along the lines of the allegations you're making, we're dealing with two governments, the Indian and the U.S., that respect the rule of law, that respect due processes for carrying out certain kinds of investigations, for extraditing someone, et cetera, et cetera. So even if what you're saying is true, I do not equate this with Osama bin Laden, who was being sheltered by the Pakistani government and who acknowledged that he was involved with the death of 3,000 Americans for these heinous crimes. And just to finish this point,
right after the program, I will personally have the videos sent to you.
I appreciate it. Just to finish this point, even if that's the case, there are processes to go through, and you don't, between two law-abiding, law-respecting governments, send or authorize or approve of an assassination on another country's soil. Because if you do, when you have law-abiding governments in place, and I take that. I take that.
I am sure, Stephen, I'm absolutely sure, Stephen, that neither the use of nerve gas in Vietnam was carried out ever by a law-abiding government. I'm sure that the airspace of Pakistan was not broken into. I'm sure no helicopters, Apache helicopters came in. I'm sure Osama bin Laden died a natural death. I'm sure Saddam Hussein went through the laws of his own country and the laws of his people, to go through whatever he went through. So I'm sure you have your perspective on what is law-abiding. And allow me to complete, please, for you really set me up out here. Let me tell you this. Iran in 2019 reported 17 CIA assets of the US intelligence agency. I'm sure they were wrong. I'm sure that Bruno Briguet, who was hired as a CIA asset by the US intelligence agency, declared a terrorist by France and Israel. I'm sure that he was never involved in terrorist activities. I'm sure he had never bombed a pro-democracy radio station in Munich. I'm sure that David Coleman Headley, who was responsible for the 2008 terror attacks in Mumbai, in which hundreds of Indians were killed, was not sent to India for extradition by the US attorney. I'm sure that I'm absolutely wrong, that the US attorney said that Headley had fulfilled all the terms and therefore he should not be sent to India for extradition. And I'm sure all the assets of the American government over the years involved in cases such as the CIA asset of the US intelligence agency expressing views of being pro-Palestine by sharing images on a Facebook handle, the agent also sharing a picture of a Free Palestine sticker, are absolutely wrong. I'm sure the ex-CIA agent of the US intelligence agency services named Mark Polymeriopolis, accusing the US for not being able to predict the Hamas attack on Israel as the US after 9/11 focused on Al-Qaeda and did not pay heed to Hamas. That officer said that the Americans had taken a wrong decision of leaving the surveillance of Hamas to Israel. I'm sure I'm wrong in all of that. But what I will not accept out here is lecturing by the Americans, because I believe the Americans are doing something fundamentally wrong out here. I'm saying to the Americans and I'm saying to Stephen Golub, don't allow a terrorist to go shopping on the streets of New York. His intentions could turn on the people on whose soil he is living. Gaurav is responding to you. I gave you a full turn, and Gaurav now, and then I'll come in, Abhishek. Gaurav.
Arnab, a couple of things. I think the Americans are negotiating. What the Americans want is, and there is a great belief in these American think tanks.
Negotiating for what?
I'll tell you, Arnab, I'll explain my point. That, when they are trying to say that move out manufacturing from China into India, now how did China get rich? It was mostly contract manufacturing by America and Europe. They don't want another China coming up, but should another China come up in the shape of India, they wanted to have a malleable and a flexible backbone like Pakistan. The problem is India does not listen to the United States of America. That is the basic problem. India buys oil from Russia. India buys S-400. India buys oil from Iran. India pretty much does whatever it wants. America wants India to be friends, but America wants India under their thumb. Now, I'm not saying this because I just have to, but I'm saying that nobody's trying to kill Pannu. No Indian is trying to kill Pannu. America is awash with weapons. If we wanted Pannu dead, he would be dead a long time back. We don't want Pannu dead. We don't want to kill anybody. Our government does not do this. Please understand. How difficult is it to kill a guy like Pannu? If he's in New York, that place is flush with weapons, flush with drug addicts. You don't have to plan something on WhatsApp to kill somebody. I mean, everybody gets robbed. Mass shootings happen in America every single day. The people carry automatic weapons inside schools in America. It's so common. I mean, I've never seen this level of violence. Now my American friend here says, between two law-abiding countries, etc. They invaded Iraq after 9/11. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. You killed lakhs of people. You displaced millions of people. Obama, your President Obama, authorized hundreds and thousands of drone strikes, and then he got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Stephen.
How does that work? You kill people,
Stephen.
You wipe out wedding parties, you wipe out wedding
I follow up to Gaurav on that. I follow up to Gaurav on that. I follow up to Gaurav on that. I'll take a question, and then I'll take a 30-second commercial break and come back to you after 30 seconds. My question to Stephen would be, and I'm sorry, Sukhi Chahal, for keeping you waiting. I'll come back to you on the other side. You see, the Americans took out al-Zawahiri in Kabul when he was apparently a state guest of the Taliban. Now, Stephen, if the argument is that, well, for you he may be a terrorist, but for us, Pannun is an activist, then tomorrow the Taliban will also say that Zawahiri for you is a terrorist, for us is an activist.
Is that a question?
Okay, 30-second break, and then I'll get Stephen's response on that.
In the India Today Best Universities 2023 survey, released recently, India's #1 ranked universities in various streams are JNU Delhi, Amity University, AIMS Delhi, IIT Delhi, and National Law School, Bengaluru.
Before I go back to Stephen, Suki Chahal, you're in Canada. What do you make of this support the Americans are giving to Pannun?
Now, first of all, I'm not in Ottawa. Actually, I'm in Punjab right now. I'm Amritsar. I'm visiting India.
Right. Sorry about that.
No problem. And number two, I'm sad and shocked, and this is how much attention you are giving to this Pannun guy. I don't think so. He is worth for this kind of attention. He does not have any value, any credibility within the Sikh community or the Punjabi community. Right now, I'm living only 6 kilometers away from his home, and I visited his area. Nobody wants to talk about him. And it is a shame. He is a shame to the Sikh community. All of his activity are very, 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 very dangerous for the Sikh community, because up to now, not too many people knew what happened to Kanishka Air. And so that's why when this guy is talking about, when he is threatening the Air India, it is a shame. It is a dangerous too. And he is trying to paint the Sikh community as a criminal element, or he is trying to paint the whole Sikh community as a terrorist community. This is a very, very big matter of concern to us. And on the another side, like the concern I have, which I'm also sad, we are talking about his nonsense, but we should also be talking about Air India itself. Air India has an authority. Air India is a private airline, and it is a Tata's airline, and they have offices in New York. And this guy openly threatened this airline. How come they cannot file the case in the U.S. court? They can reach out to the same Justice Department, U.S. Justice Department, and they can show to them that this is the nonsense of this guy. This is the background. This is what he does. This is what he's talking about, and you are making him hero. This is a very, very sad concern. Whatever is the development is happening, it is a very, very sad for the whole Sikh community. Actually, so I don't even like to talk about this his nonsense anymore.
I take your take on that. Stephen, would you like to respond to my earlier point on Al-Zawahiri?
Well, first, I'd like to thank the previous guest for what he just said, for illuminating this situation and offering a different perspective than we're getting from the other panelists, including myself. A distinction I would make that's fundamental is at least twofold. One, we have people who we know were involved with committing massive human rights abuses and against innocent civilians. And the other is a fundamental international law distinction that you just can't go about assigning people on your own initiative. In this case, we assume it wasn't the Indian government initiative, to just go and assassinate people in other countries, even if you don't like what they're saying. This fellow, if you're going to come up with proof that this fellow was actually involved with assassination attempts or with human rights abuses or mass murders, then that makes him maybe puts him on the plane of Osama bin Laden. So far, I haven't heard anything like that, and I can't imagine that anyone would be on the plane, the same legal plane, political plane as Osama bin Laden. So those are two fundamental distinctions. Right. And be careful about what you're saying here. Believe me, I would not justify or excuse U.S. human rights abuses. Not would I justify any by the Indian or Chinese or Russian or any other governments. I don't at all. I agree with some of what you said.
Not if.
Other points
I tell you this. I tell you. No.
See, you misrepresented what was going on.
No. If a group has claimed responsibility, allow me to complete. I let Abhishek come in on that. Stephen, 1 minute. Stephen, allow me, please. Allow me, please, Stephen. If a group has taken responsibility, there is no scope. No, Stephen. If a group has taken responsibility, there is no point in defending them. The SFJ has taken responsibility for the breach of security for the Indian Prime Minister. I want Abhishek to just respond. It's not speculative, sir. Abhishek.
Ironic that we are having this conversation on a day when Henry Kissinger has died, and he was someone who would browbeat Indira Gandhi because he wanted Yahya Khan. He was someone who facilitated the coup against Allende so that Pinochet could come. You know, it's ironic. But then if the United States really thinks that something happened to a citizen of the United States who's not a terrorist, is this the best way to communicate to a friend like India? That's the question, Stephen, you should be answering.
I think let me get in Partha on that. He's been patiently listening to both sides.
The U.S. has
Partha, at the core of this,
and your own government is taking this very seriously. They're not dismissing it the way some folks here on the show are.
After the indictment,
I believe
this very seriously.
I believe
we should wait until they come out with this.
I believe that
after the indictment.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Partha will respond to you, but I know that India has had an interest in the purchase of large armed drones called the Sea Guardian from the US, which is a whopping amount of billions. But owing to the ongoing bureaucratic tensions, America is trying to negotiate to seal it. I agree with Gaurav. The Americans are sealing this. The Americans at the core of this are looking at business. This is my own take. Partha, would you like to respond to it? Partha.
I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody. I look at it as the way the US and especially the present administration look at the world. For them, Canada is a next door neighbor. It is a military ally. So they are not going to forsake Canada for the sake of, upholding whatever the Indians may say. Canada for them is untouchable by anybody else. It's the holy cow. This is why I started by talking about Canada-US relationship.
Yeah.
And I can also say this. It's not all Canadian prime ministers who have been like this, but it has certainly been a characteristic of the Trudeau family. Father and son. I'm narrowing it. I don't blame all Canadians. I don't blame Canada as a whole. There are many areas we have cooperated with. We also recognize the fact that the first nuclear reactors we have came with Canadian collaboration. So yes, we do have a lot of to go. But I'm afraid you will also have to recognize that when a guy like Justin Trudeau comes along, he comes all the way from Canada only to visit Amritsar, it's the Sikh homeland. Is he looking for his votes of Sikhs in Canada through people in India? He will fail. Because in India, we are proud of our Sikh population. They have stood by us. They're the strong arm of the army. But some guys who are misled, and I want to bring this in very clearly. Canada also knows that these guys operate through Pakistan. They also know that funding goes to the terrorists from Canada in Pakistan. I've served as ambassador in Pakistan, so I should know. And the US is not going to rub an ally and chum like Canada just for something they do with the terrorists in Pakistan who come in India. We are proud of our Sikh community. I'll never say that this is a... It is misguided element.
But my closing remarks to Brahma. Yeah, I agree. But closing remarks to Brahma, how aggressive should we get with the Americans? And can we solve this through the back channels? Because the matter's gone to court. Are the Americans only doing this to tell the Canadians that we have raised our voice on your behalf? But they're also doing a balancing act there. Maybe that's possible, Brahma?
Arnab, India is in danger of repeating the same mistake it made in relation to Canada. If things have come to a pretty pass regarding Canada, India bears some responsibility. India did not seek to hold Canada to account for the death of 329 people in the 1985 Air India bombing, which two separate Canadian inquiries found was carried out by Canada-based Sikh terrorists. the mastermind of that bombing, Talvinder Parmar. Canada refused to extradite Parmar to India or even to put him under surveillance. No effort was made by India to put sustained pressure on Canada to start cleaning up its act. Now, history is repeating itself. In relation to the US, this guy, Pannun, who actually was a pretty obscure person until he began making terrorist threats from American soil this year. I actually didn't know about him until more recently. Now, this guy has made a series of terrorist threats that you have spelled out, Arnab. But the Indian government has not put any pressure on Washington to take action against him. Instead, the Indian government very quickly set up a committee, a high-powered committee to investigate American inputs on Pannun. I find that strange that there has been no pressure from the Indian government on the American government to take action against a man who openly from American soil repeatedly makes terrorist threats against Indian targets, including against the airport in New Delhi, against Air India. He warns Sikhs not to fly Air India because otherwise they could face life-threatening consequences. He said all that on video. And yet, there has been no effort on India's part either to pressure Washington to take action against him or to correct the narrative that the New York Times, Reuters, and others are putting out. It's really awful.
Yeah, I think
because
I think what
exactly
comes
what we did
across
in
here.
relation to Canada.
No, I think that we must be self-critical of this. I'll only end by saying that I'm personally not very happy with our response. We must be more front-footed. But two quick thoughts at the end. India must really exercise greater effort to strengthen our external intelligence and our geostrategic depth. As an emerging global superpower, it can't be the MEA all the time who's going to do this kind of diplomacy. We have to be more front-footed. We have to have much more depth in the way we look at international affairs. I thank you all very much for different perspectives on this. And thank you very much, Stephen, for your contrary perspective as well. And ladies and gentlemen, one quick reminder. Tomorrow we have a big event in Bengaluru. Karnataka's leading channel has a conclave. That's the Republic Kannada conclave that is live from, I think, 9:30 in the morning. Republic Kannada. If you are following our news in Kannada, I'd love you to tune into that. See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Good night and goodbye.